All right, everyone. Thank you for joining another episode of the Pursuit of Progress. I'm your host, Benjamin Adams, and along with my co host, Adam Lang. We hope everyone's Friday is going well. Have a really exciting podcast today. Adam, how's your week been going?
It's been going good, my man. Just can't believe how fast this year is flying by, but I think that's a good thing. That means we're staying busy and enjoying life and hopefully accomplishing a lot of our goals.
Yeah, it's tough to believe that we're almost 50% of the way through 2024, isn't it?
Yeah. This next few months too always seems to go by the fastest, probably because we all enjoy the summertime so much here in Colorado. So it's the time of year where I wish everything could slow down a little bit and we could really, pack 6 weeks, 6 weeks into every month for, June, July, August.
Yeah, it goes by so fast, and I wanted to have you on today to talk about something that I think is really important, and it's personal branding. And personal branding in 2024 is now more important than ever. And the reason I wanted you to talk about this is because I look at you as an expert in this field, just all the things that you're doing on social media, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, a lot of your different platforms. And I've also noticed just over this past year you are really dialing it in with your videos, both the short form and then also the long form content. When you look back from what you were doing a couple of years ago, you can just see the incredible jumps in improvement. But then also you're doing, email marketing, text message, you have all these different follow-up systems that you use. So I was just hoping that you could share with us why it's so important to have a personal brand and just two or three things on how to have success in building your personal brand in 2024.
Well, thanks a lot, man. I appreciate that. Well, personal branding is one of these topics that, I've really changed my perspective on it over the last couple of years. And for any of our viewers or listeners that know me personally, some of you might enjoy my content. Others might be like, man, I'm just getting spammed 24/7 by this guy. What is this guy's
Mhm.
deal? And I have a unique, I guess, perspective on personal branding from the industry that I'm in. Obviously, I'm a real estate agent. I have a few other side hustles that I'm getting involved in. So for me, personal branding is very intentional. It's not just about being a peacock and kind of showing people what I'm up to every day. It's there's a lot more behind it than that. It's not
Right.
superficial. There's a deeper meaning and purpose behind personal branding. And a lot of that just comes down to living your life by strategy, creating a life that you want to have for the long term. And a lot of the goals that I have, and I think a lot of the other, viewers, listeners, I know you yourself, any entrepreneurs out there or small business owners, you just have to really understand that in today's this atmosphere, in the world that we live in today, branding is more important than ever. It's
Yeah.
really the only way that you can stand out among just a sea of constant bombardment of media and the stuff that is just trying to capture your attention. I mean, if you're watching TV, on Instagram, wherever, whatever you're doing, if it's involving technology, you're just getting blasted with thousands of different forms of brands 24/7. Back in the day, there was just those few iconic brands, Nike, Coke, McDonald's, stuff like that. When I went to school for marketing, that's kind of what branding was. And fast forward 25 years, it's completely different because with the technology and the ability to have a phone in every single person's hand, they all
Yeah.
have the capability and the power to create their own brand just from what's inside their iPhone or their Android phone. So personal branding is completely changed over the years, and something that I personally am just really kind of learning myself, and every week, every month, every year, getting a little bit better at. I like to think.
Yeah, it's so exciting because on one hand, all of us have the same opportunities here to build a personal brand, through the internet and all these different social media platforms. And I always reference the digital age. We had the industrial age, the industrial revolution, and we've entered into this new digital age. And I've talked to my kids about building their personal brand as youngsters, and what are you doing? I ask my kids, like, start all of this discipline that you're developing and these habits. Start thinking about developing a personal brand. What's the first important topic and key to building a really successful brand in your mind?
Yeah, and just kind of before we get into those three kind of points that I'll share today, I just want to make a quick side note that there are a lot more than three. I could turn this into a four-part series, and we can obviously share more on this topic on future episodes if you guys are getting any value out of this and interested and want to learn more. So if you guys are, feel free to reach out to us, give us some feedback, let us know if this is benefiting you at all. But
Mhm.
I just wanted to, though, before I really start talking about personal branding, making everybody listening understand that this doesn't have to apply only to people that are entrepreneurs or people that are in a business role where they're sales or trying to get themselves out to try and sell somebody on something.
Yeah.
You could be really taking advantage of personal branding even just from expanding your social network, creating new opportunities for your family with travel and friendships. And there's so many different benefits from building a personal brand outside of kind of the main purpose that I use it for, again, though, which is, just expanding my sphere of influence, my
Right.
network that hopefully will see me through my personal branding as an expert in the field of real estate investing, marketing, some of the things that I'm passionate about.
Mhm.
So, the first thing is something that is a challenge that I've faced over the last, I'd say, 2.5 years is really when I started getting committed to being intentional about building a personal brand. And it's something that a lot of my peers and other people that I'm connected with that are also very motivated on building their personal brands struggle with, probably almost more than anything else. And that's just a simple word to really ingrain into your heads, and that's authenticity.
Right.
And authenticity at the surface level, yeah, being authentic, acting like yourself, that kind of stuff. Yeah, and that's all very true. But there's a lot deeper meaning behind authenticity. And what I mean by that is always providing value to your audience and being very intentional about always wanting to serve others before getting anything in return. One of my favorite entrepreneurs is Gary Vaynerchuk, and he has a really good book called Jab Jab. I can't remember the name of it. Jab Jab Right Hook, I think is what it's called. And
Mhm.
basically, just the concept of that is the jabbing, the jab jab is just you provide value, you provide more value, you provide even more value, and only then can you do the right hook. And the right hook is then being a call to action, meaning something that you're trying to get from somebody, whether it be them
Mhm.
signing up for a program or maybe scheduling a call with you to learn more about your real estate services, whatever it may be. But just wanted to get across the point of always have the focus on value and being authentic in providing that value.
Mhm.
Another way to look at this is it's less about me, it's more about who I'm talking to. So,
Yeah.
like in a book, there's always the protagonist and the antagonist, the head, the main character in the story, and then kind of the bad guy. You always want to just be looking at marketing from a same kind of perspective where you're always very intentional about all of your marketing, all of your social media posts, whatever it is that you're doing to create this personal brand. You're always doing that with the intention of providing that value to whoever it is you're trying to reach. Authenticity is a topic that is very very difficult. When you start filming videos, being on camera is tough. It's very hard just to kind of get your words put together and just speak
Yeah.
from a place of authenticity, but it's something that only can happen through repetition. The last thing I'll just mention on this specific point is just in order to be genuine and come off truly as
Okay.
authentic and transparent, Only way you're going to do that, unless you're the one out of a million that it just comes natural to, is
Yeah.
just by getting those reps in. And I have so many friends that have talked to me about building their personal brands, and they've never taken a single step forward. They've been on the sidelines for, in some cases, years, because they're too afraid to put out that first video, to make that first social media post, because they're worried about what other people are going to think. And
Yeah.
they're just, they're concerned about that. And you just have to really just be willing to have some thick skin, just get those reps in. And as long as you're doing that from a very authentic place, you're going to come out ahead.
That's one thing that I was going to ask. And, and I know this a little bit from my own experience, but if you can just share your experience really briefly on what it was like making those first couple of videos and how you had to get out of your comfort zone and how uncomfortable that was. And then you fast forward 2.5 years later, as far as just getting those reps in and where you're at now, what has that growth been like?
So we are all our own worst critics.
Yeah.
Even right now on a podcast, just with one of my best friends that obviously is going out into the public for other people to see, but I'm still in the back of my mind, do I look okay? Am I speaking all right? Am I stumbling over my words?
Hmm.
The thing I'll say to that is the best way that you can actually engage with your listeners and your audience, they don't want something that is perfectly polished where it sounds like a commercial. If they see you stumble over your words, if they realize that maybe you're nervous, maybe it's kind of like a public speaking event where you're nervous to be up in front of people on stage, by
Right.
them seeing that in you and being able to relate to that with you, that automatically has brought them to a closer relationship with you because they can relate to you.
Right.
There's a common, just kind of a phrase in marketing and just branding of, you always want to build a relationship where people know, like, and trust you. And one of the easiest ways to do that, again, is by being authentic. But by being authentic, I also mean being just natural and real and not overly polished where everything is perfect. When I first started
Yeah.
filming videos for my YouTube and just kind of getting myself out there, I was using a teleprompter at times. I was,
Mm.
very scripted in what I was trying to say. And looking back on that, that was probably the worst thing I could have done. Yeah, it got me a little bit more confident just to take a step forward and take action. However, those are the things that make you not come off authentic, and people pick up on that quick. They can
Mm.
tell
Yeah.
that you're scripted, you're just not being yourself. Whatever piece of content you're trying to create, it's never going to be perfect, and that's okay. If you're waiting for it to be perfect, you're going to be sitting on the sidelines for the rest of your life, because it's
Yeah.
just never going to happen.
That's right. I love what you said about just getting those reps in, getting out of your comfort zone, and you don't have to be perfect. And and then also just learning not to care about other people's opinions, as you touched on at the beginning of the podcast here. Thank you
And
for sharing
before
that. So,
I didn't interrupt you. One last thing I'll say on that too, guys, is one of the easiest ways to build up that confidence and just to be able to more naturally speak to your audience is through story,
yeah.
rather than just rattling off a bullet list of bullet points on a topic that you're trying to get across to maybe build authority in whatever industry you're trying to leave an impression on. It is so much more valuable and easier from a person that is building up the personal brand like myself, to just think of stories that can still convey that same message, but
Mhm.
through story format. With story format, kind of going back to that protagonist antagonist idea, if people listen to the story and then they start to envision themselves in that story, and they can relate to it at a much deeper level than you just rattling off information, which at that point is almost like they're just watching a webinar, or they're in a classroom listening to somebody speak. So it's
Mhm.
it's a much different style of presenting,
Yeah.
but it's something that it took me a very long time to truly kind of grasp, and I'm still working on that. That's something that is easier said than done. And a lot of that comes down to preparation and just
Mhm.
kind of thinking through what you want to talk about ahead of time, and thinking of ways to relate those points to a story. But if you can think of a story to incorporate whatever it is you're trying to get across,
Yeah.
you're going to feel much more confident when you're presenting that on camera, on stage, wherever it is that you're trying to build up your audience.
Yeah, being able to share and speak from your own experience, and tell
Hmm.
that story. And there's so much value in our stories because
Because
all of our stories are different. We've all gone through adversity, but we've gone through different types of adversity. And your
absolutely.
story is what makes you unique, what makes you great, and my story is what makes me unique. So, what is the second most important tip in building a successful brand in 2024?
So the second one is, in my opinion, probably the most important. And I think this is actually something that can be related not only to building a personal brand, but just to self improvement. Just a lot of the topics we talk about on this podcast in general. You guys have heard us talk about this specifically on building up a better routine, your personal fitness, your mental health. And that's just consistency. If I could have, I don't have any tattoos, but if I had a tattoo, I think I would somehow incorporate the word consistent somehow in the tattoo, because I think that word,
Mr.
although it's such
Consistent.
Mr. Consistent, and although it's such a bland, common word, it is just so incredibly valuable. And the more you think about that, and the more you just have that as a top of mind focus, something that you're just always aware of with
Mhm.
everything that you're doing in life, whether it be business, work, relationships, family, I don't care what it is. If you're able to understand the power of consistency, you are going to be light years ahead of where you would be if you were just dabbling in and out of whatever it is you're passionate about.
Mhm.
I will use just kind of a story as an example here. With YouTube, both Ben and I are both in the process of building out our YouTube channels. If you guys aren't that familiar with YouTube, obviously, I'm sure everybody knows what YouTube is, but YouTube is actually the second most used search engine after Google. So after Google, number two is YouTube. YouTube is actually owned by Google. YouTube is so incredibly powerful when it comes to people using it for a different purpose than they do Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, all these other social sites. They're using YouTube to gather information. And when presenting that information to people on YouTube, it comes back to this idea of story. But
Yeah.
more importantly, with building a YouTube channel, the way that you really get momentum and really feed the YouTube algorithm in order to build up your reach and the ability for YouTube to recognize you as uh, an account that they trust and want to promote more
Yeah.
is through consistency. And it is hard. It's hard to get out into the field and film every week and then get
Mhm.
behind the camera and prepare your content, send it off to an editor if you have one. There's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of stuff that doesn't have an immediate return on its investment. But this consistency is what keeps such few people um, it keeps very few people from succeeding with it when it comes to
Yeah.
YouTube, and it's all about consistency. But again, you guys can apply this to anything in life. If you're trying to lose 10 pounds, if you go to the gym 3 days this week and then you don't go again for 2 weeks, you're not losing the weight. You're probably gaining weight. So
Mhm.
the only way to see progress is through consistency. And with personal branding, it's a slog. It's something that's going to take time. So the last thing I'll see on consistency is, rather than just use that word and just kind of have that be your focus, you need to create actionable steps and some form of a game plan to hold yourself accountable to being consistent. So, if you
Mhm.
commit to yourself that I'm going to make one post a day, Monday through Friday. On Mondays, I'm going to talk about something motivational. On Wednesday, I'm going to do like a case study or something that maybe is relevant to the industry I'm in, and then maybe Friday do some sort of a Q&A, or ask my audience for questions that I can help answer. If you have a very specific set of tasks that you're
Yeah.
basically, again, reverse engineering this to a point where it's very recognizable and doable, that's going to drastically improve your chances for staying consistent. So just, you
Mhm.
can't just say I'm going to be consistent and consider yourself successful. You need to really have a lot more clarity and more actionable steps to hold yourself to that consistent level.
Yeah, this reminds me of a story that I wanted to share. When I was first getting into the mortgage business, my manager was just incredibly successful. And I asked him, what are the keys to his success? And he gave me his answers. And one of them was just being consistent. And I walked away from that just feeling so kind of disappointed and discouraged because I was expecting like these really, really sexy answers and these outrageous things that he was doing to achieve, the incredible success that he had. And what I realized is that, a lot of these principles are we don't give them enough weight because we want to dismiss them so easily because they're not the sexiest responses or the biggest ideas that but they are the building blocks, the things that you're going to build off of. And hearing that, the consistency, it's just such a great reminder of how important that is to really have success. And it's difficult at times, isn't it?
Incredibly difficult. And I mean, you're not going to understand the level of difficulty until you're in the trenches doing it yourself because, it sounds easy, oh, I'm going to do a social media post once a day. No problem. But
Mhm.
to truly be executing that at a high level and being consistent with that over the period of weeks, months, years, that's a different story. And the last
Yeah.
thing I'll say on consistency is I implore any of our listeners or viewers to think of any, and I mean any successful. When I say successful, I want to say very ultra successful person. I don't care what industry it's in. If it's an athlete, if it's a
Yeah.
business owner, if it's a musician, whatever it is, I guarantee you, if you were to interview that person and ask them, what's the key to their success, it's consistency, with
Mhm.
the exception of people that won the Powerball and that kind of stuff. People that have, all of a sudden, for people that, from the outside view look incredibly successful and they are incredibly successful, you don't see the 20 years prior where they were grinding, where they're
Yeah.
in their restaurant 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, being consistent. Consistency is something that very few people, I think, just have the ability to understand and to just. I think part of the problem with why people quit is they don't see movement. They don't see the needle move on a
Yeah.
daily basis, so they don't think they're actually progressing. They don't think that they're really having any success from what they're doing, and you're not going to a lot of times when you're being consistent until you have that 30,000-foot view a year later and can look back on things and then realize, wow, damn, I was here and now I'm here. Um,
Yeah,
you
and a
you
lot of
can't do
times
that.
the needle's not moving because it's just moving so slowly that you can't even recognize it almost, but when you add that up day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, and it compounds, well, all of a sudden after 5 years, you get incredible results, and I'm a sports fan, I'm a fan of the Denver Nuggets, and they're going through an incredible playoff run again here in 24. And whenever I watch professional athletes, they make it look so easy. These guys are just so incredibly skilled. And it's so easy for someone to think, oh, he's just so talented, or maybe he's tall. No, these guys have spent hours in the gym every single day working on their skills for decades because that's what it takes to get to that level. And if you're going to be elite in anything, doesn't matter what it is, that's the type of commitment and consistency it takes.
The last thing I'll say on that is I know you and I both have a few friends that I'm sure we think of the same people, even when I'm bringing this up, but that are a different type of consistency here. Maybe they're consistent with just doing whatever it is on a daily basis, but they're interested in one thing. They're pursuing one career and they're consistent about that for 6 months, but then they're not seeing the progress they were expecting. So then instead of staying consistent with that goal, they just
Mhm.
go a completely different direction, start a new career path, and then they're back to ground zero. They're back to day
Yeah.
one. So I just want to also point out that consistency is also very important from a longevity standpoint, and just understanding that you have to stick with it and stay consistent on the long. It's a long game. It's not,
Yeah.
something that you're going to just do for a week or a month. It literally can be years or even decades to get to
Yeah.
the goal that you're trying to achieve.
I love that analogy because everything in life really is about the long game. Investing. You hear Warren Buffett talk about playing the long game. And that's exactly what you want to do in your life because when you play the long game, you're not going for those short-term wins and being someone that is making all the noise, you're going for the long term. You want to live a successful life, have a fulfilling life, have a great career. And the way that you do that is by playing the long game.
Hmm.
So you've given us two great tips so far. Tip number one, to recap, was being authentic. Tip number two, consistency. Share with us now the last tip that you were going to share, tip number three.
So with, building, and this is a little bit more specific to building a brand and building a personal brand, both kind of go hand in hand here, but it's just being very open to education and growth and being a consistent and daily learner. And what I mean by that
Yeah.
is just investing in yourself, both in personal development, but also just be always leading your goals in your life through a perspective, absorbing new ideas and realizing that yes, some might not work out, but you got to be very quick when it comes to adapting to where we are currently in the world. So, with technology as an example, I'm 41. TikTok was something that I kind of missed the boat on. It kind of happened after I was already involved in Facebook and then Instagram. And it was just one other thing that I, really just didn't have the motivation or energy or, just I didn't see the value into leaning into that.
Mhm.
However, when it comes to building a personal brand, you really have to look at this from a different angle and understand that in order to be at that top tier of performance with expanding your reach and your audience, you have to be willing to always be learning, investing in yourself to learn new skill sets, learn about new tools, and just different things that can make producing content, all of this kind of stuff, just a lot more achievable. TikTok was an example from a few years ago, but more recently, I would use Chat GPT and AI. I think some of the most successful people in the world, outside of even just personal branding and branding in general, just businesses in general, the ones that are always the most successful are the ones that can see 3 steps ahead
Yeah.
and be able to pivot today to be in the right position when that day comes to capitalize on whatever it is that new technology is affording us. And right now, AI, without a doubt, is an example of that. So, I have a lot of friends and different people that I'm connected with that are also building personal brands that are really just kind of old school. And they're just, what, I'm going to do one Facebook post a day. I'm going to do a monthly email newsletter and doing these things that worked 5 years ago, but that's what their mindset still is today,
Yeah.
as opposed to filming a video, or more importantly, maybe batch recording 10 videos on a Sunday morning for 4 hours, having content now for the next 3 weeks, repurposing that content with a VA, a virtual assistant that I have in the Philippines, to repurpose that content into specific dimension format for LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok,
Mhm.
all these different channels, and also leveraging AI tools to then rewrite the different descriptions and scripts. And I'm using this as an example, but there's just so
Yeah.
much, you can get so much further in less time with what we have available to us today. And I am amazed at how few people are actually capitalizing and leaning into that and taking advantage of that. So,
Mhm.
my third point was really just, again, investing in personal development and just education and just always being willing to learn what's new, what's about to come out in the future, and just
Yeah.
positioning yourself so when that comes, you're one of the people that's first to market. So you are able to kind of stand out among a very crowded, population of other people trying to do the same thing, and have the ability to stand out a little bit more because you're different. you're edgy, you're a little bit more revolutionary than maybe some
Mhm.
of the other brands that are out there.
I'm speaking for myself here, but when I was going to school, I did not enjoy going to school. I looked at it as a chore. I did not want to, come home and do homework, even into high school and college. And I developed some habits, I would say, that are just unhealthy as it related just to learning and studying because I had this negative perception of what learning meant. I associated it with going to school. I would cram for tests. I would not, read
Mhm.
my books. But what I realized though is that so I put this label on myself that I don't enjoy learning. But what I realized is that once I started learning, once I started educating myself, reading books every day, listening to podcasts, I realized how fulfilling that actually was. And now personal growth and development is just an incredibly important part of my day because if I don't feel like I'm moving forward and I'm growing, I feel like I'm being stagnant or receding in certain areas of my life, and I don't like feeling that way. When I don't go to
Absolutely.
the gym, my muscles get smaller, or if I don't go for runs, I lose my fitness. I don't like feeling that way, that I'm going the wrong way instead of improving, and same with my learning. And you're someone that's had a really big influence on me as far as, getting me in the habit of reading and listening to podcasts, things that I hadn't done up until here in the last 5 years. So thank you for that, and just what a powerful example, and even beyond the personal branding, I think there's just so much value in that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just incredible how fast the world is moving at this point, and it's not going to slow down. It's only going to get faster and faster. And that is a huge for people that are willing to accept that and lean into that and educate
Mhm.
themselves on how to fit within that mold and to embrace all of these incredible tools that are available to us for a
Yeah,
fraction of, I mean, very, very affordable too, I might add. Chat GPT as an example, it's free if you guys didn't know, versus, being a little bit more stubborn or just not willing to learn and kind of keep doing things the way they've been done for the last 5, 10 years. And that gap is only continuing to expand more and more every single day. And if you guys are an entrepreneur or a business owner, just really look at this as a huge opportunity. What took entrepreneurs and business people 10 years to establish their brands, back
mhm,
in the 90s and 2000s, you can create that same level of brand awareness in a year now, or even
yeah.
less. You have such an incredible ability to just 10x your ability to just reach people and expand on your brand. So,
Yeah,
um,
and for someone that doesn't have that experience or maybe has never engaged in branding, specifically different platforms and social media, I know that that can sound intimidating, and, you know, you might not wanna do that, but I agree with you 100% in that we are now in the digital age. It isn't just important, it is necessary. You are gonna get left behind, and it can still be intimidating, or you can have some fear, but you can still get started. If you haven't started, just start small. Just start learning, one platform, how to make a video, how to edit a video. And there are so many affordable resources out there just when it comes to editing even. I know your videos, you're using a professional editor, and I know it's not costing you an arm and a leg. There is a cost, but it's very affordable, and you're making some great content.
Absolutely. Yeah. And kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier today and on a few of our other podcasts recently on you just have to take that first step. You just have to get over your ego or get over your concern of not being this perfect persona in front of other people and
Yeah.
just getting yourself out there. People, I talk about all these different tools that are available out there. I don't want to make people though think that in order to build a personal brand, they need this, $5,000 fancy phone with or fancy camera with lighting and microphones and
Mhm.
all this editing software. And that is not necessary. For many, many, many of my friends that are very successful in branding, this is all they have. They have a phone
Yeah.
and that there is no excuse whatsoever you to be able to at least get get your first step towards building your brand just using your phone. And I'll leave you guys with this. There's two types of content out there when it comes to building a personal or a professional brand. There's what's called creating content, which would be, like I mentioned with Ben earlier, setting aside 4 hours on a Sunday to batch record a bunch of videos that I'm going to then chop up into Instagram reels and YouTube videos and all this stuff. That's creating content. That's
Yeah.
content that I've thought about ahead of time. I've planned out some of the topics. Maybe I've used tools like Chat GPT that I mentioned to get ideas and formulate kind of my overall plan of action for creating that content. You can also create that content though with your phone. You don't need to have all these fancy bells and whistles.
Yeah.
But for people that are just getting started, don't focus on creating content, focus on just capturing content. And by capturing content, I just mean share with people on social media just what you're doing in your life. If you're
Mhm.
Ben, for example, as a single father, he could be, getting home from work, open up his phone, click video, and film a 60-second video of him just saying, hey guys, I just got home from work. Man, I'm exhausted, but you know what? I got to make dinner for my kids tonight. Not the best cook, but we just started making these lettuce wraps that kids love and they're easy to make. They're
Yeah.
healthy. What about you guys? Have you guys got any easy tips, easy cooking tips for dinner for 15 minutes or less? Something like that. I guarantee you post that, you're going to get an incredible amount of engagement. You're going to get the ball rolling. You're going to build up that confidence muscle a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's just going to be a little bit easier for the next video you do. And again, it's just about taking action and just being willing to jump in the game and just try.
Get out of your comfort zone and start acting, start doing. It's going to be intimidating at times. You are going to be uncomfortable, but go for it. Go do it.
Yep. And that was just three, guys. I've got a lot of other, if you can't tell, I'm very passionate about this. And I just think this is one of the areas that has a ton of ROI, a ton of value, a ton of opportunity if you just dedicate a little bit of your time and energy into this, especially if you're a business owner and are trying to grow your business. So yeah, if you ever want to talk through any of this in more depth, again, feel free to reach out to me. I've got a link on my social media feed as well as on YouTube where you guys can schedule a 30-minute call with me. I just do a Zoom call with you and just brainstorm with you. I just love to share ideas with each other and no obligation or anything. Just would love to connect and just bounce ideas off one another and see if there's a few ways I could provide value. So,
And what's your YouTube and Instagram handle if someone wants to go direct to your social media platforms?
yep, I've got a personal and professional one, but I would just recommend to make it easier, just look up Adam Sells Denver and you'll find me.
Okay. All right, everyone. Well, Adam, thank you again. This has been awesome content on building a brand in 2024. Just amazing feedback. Thank you for sharing your experience, what you're doing, and how you're doing it. And with that, let's go ahead and sign off.
Yep. Thanks a lot, guys. Really appreciate your time. Hopefully, you guys got some value out of this. If you did, do us a solid. Share this with a friend. Help us expand our reach. Help us grow this channel, grow this podcast so we can hopefully just help more and more people every week. We really want to just make this a project of service and be able to provide value to as many people as we can. So, if you guys could, please do so.
All right, everyone. Have a great week, and we will see you next Friday. This is Ben Adams signing off for the pursuit of progress.
Catch you guys next week.